Have you ever had this feeling that something just feels off? You can't quite explain it, but just maybe you feel like this heaviness, or maybe a little bit more stuck or disconnected. Like something inside you, it just doesn't quite fit anymore. And it's frustrating because you're trying to move forward. You're doing all the right things. You're thinking about the next right step. You're trying to make changes in your life or even figure out what needs to shift. But something inside you just still feels really unsettled. What if it actually has nothing to do with motivation or mindset or discipline? What if what you're actually carrying is grief? And I'm not talking about the grief of losing someone, although that absolutely too. But I'm talking about the grief that goes unrecognized from maybe the experiences you lived through, or the hope of life that you thought you'd live, or the dreams you set aside, or the versions of yourself that changed or even got left behind. The grief that never really got acknowledged. And when that goes unnamed, it doesn't just disappear. It can shape your relationships, your choices, even the way you see yourself. So in this video, I want to help you recognize some of the hidden ways that grief is showing up in your life and how just naming it really can help you change the way you understand yourself and even the path forward. And I know this personally. Many of you know that I've walked through the tragic passing of my brother, and that changed everything for me. But grief has also shown up in my life in other ways too, ways I didn't even recognize. Even just recently, turning 50, I found myself just sitting with this grief that I'll likely never be a mother in this lifetime. And it hurts. It hit me harder this past year in ways that I didn't realize or even expect. And I'll talk about that in another video another time, but I share it here really just to give an example of how grief can live inside of us in ways we don't always name or we don't always recognize. And I know I'm not alone in that, and neither are you. So before we look at the different ways that hidden grief can show up in our lives, I want to name something that most people don't really recognize. When most people hear the word grief, they think of the loss or the death of someone that they love, and that is extremely profound and real and painful. But there's also another kind of grief that doesn't always get named. The grief that comes from the losses we experience in life that don't always have a clear moment of acknowledgement or recognition. Maybe it's the dream that didn't happen, or the relationship that still has loose ends, or the version of yourself that changed, or the life that you thought you'd be living now. This is sometimes called ambiguous loss. In grief research, ambiguous loss refers to the losses that don't have really a clear ending or recognition or acknowledgement, which makes it harder for us to process and really move through. And it's the kind of grief that can really live inside of us for years without us ever even realizing that's what it is. And often it isn't just one loss, it compounds one experience layered on top of the other until the weight of it just really starts showing up in ways we can't even really explain. So let's talk about some of the ways hidden grief shows up, because once you name it, you can start to make space for it. So the first way is the life you thought you'd have. Let's definitely start here because I think most of us are carrying some version of this. I know I am. There's this life that maybe you imagined for yourself. Maybe it was clear and specific, or maybe it was just a feeling, a sense of how things were supposed to go in your life. Or the career you were going to build, or the relationship you were going to have, the family, the home, the version of yourself that was going to be standing here and settled and fulfilled and successful, like you made it. And then life happened. Maybe responsibilities piled up and that dream just wasn't practical anymore. Or maybe it was a life disruption, a deep loss, an illness, a relationship falling apart that changed the whole trajectory of your life. Or maybe you just kept waiting for the right time and that right time just never came. Or the job you didn't go after, or the business you never started, or the degree you put on hold, or the creative path you told yourself wasn't realistic, or the relationship you really, really wanted but just never let yourself really reach for. And you didn't fall apart over it. You kept adjusting, you kept going, you told yourself you were fine. But underneath all of that, there's grief. For the life that didn't happen, for the version of yourself that wanted those things, for the paths that you didn't take and the ones that got taken from you. And that grief is real, even if nobody ever told you that you were allowed to feel it. That grief is true and it's real. And then there's the passage of time. This one is a little quieter, but it runs deep. There's grief that comes simply from time moving forward, from realizing certain seasons of your life are behind you and you can't go back. Maybe you find yourself feeling nostalgic in ways that just ache inside, or longing for a chapter of feeling more alive, or more open, or more full of possibility. And not because everything was perfect back then, but because something about it just felt like it still could be, or there's possibility there. Or maybe it's just watching your parents age, or your kids grow up and leave, or your body changing in ways you didn't expect. I definitely am feeling that right now. Or milestones arriving that you thought that would be different. And there's a real longing in all of that. Wishing you could slow it down or return to it somehow, or relive certain moments in your life just one more time. And that longing is grief. The grief for the seasons of life that have passed, or for the time that doesn't come back, for the chapters that were closed before you were even ready. And then there's the unseen wounds. This one has a different energy from the others, because this isn't about losing something or loss or a life that didn't happen. This is about something that happened to you, or something that should have happened that maybe never did. Maybe it's being betrayed by somebody that you trusted deeply, or being rejected in a way that just hit you straight to the core, or being overlooked or dismissed, or made to feel like you were too much or not enough. Carrying wounds from your childhood that no one ever acknowledged. Pain that was never really witnessed by anyone. And because life just kept moving, nobody stopped to say, you know what, that wasn't okay. You deserve better than that. Maybe you just kept moving too. But those experiences, they left a mark. When they never got named, they start to shape things. They shape your life. Maybe how much you trust people, or how safe you feel letting others in. What you believe you're worth. Whether good things are actually available to you. Maybe you lost hope, or maybe you lost trust, or you started to expect disappointment before it even arrives. And that too is grief. Grief for what it happened, and grief for what should have been there for you that wasn't. And then there's the you that got left behind. Sometimes the grief isn't about what happened around us. It's about who we had to become inside of it to get through it. Maybe you had to become the strong one, or the responsible one, or the one who had to keep everything together because somebody had to. And those parts of you were real and necessary. They got you through. But in becoming that person, other parts of you had to go quiet. Maybe the fearless version of you, or the one that used to dream without limits, or the one that was curious and open and hadn't really hardened yet. Or even the softer parts of you, the playful parts, the part of you that just wanted to be taken care of for once without always having to take care of everybody else. And then one day you look up and you think, where did that person go? Who was I before all of this? Is that version still in me? That too is grief. Grief for the parts of yourself you had to leave behind just to survive. And sometimes grief for the person you were becoming before something just disrupted it. That too is grief. And then there's the unfinished business. This one might be a little uncomfortable to sit with, because it's not always about what's over. It's about what never got completed. The conversations that never happened, the words you never got to say or even never got to hear, or the relationship that maybe ended, but just there's still so much unresolved, or the project that you never finished, or the dream you began and just had to walk away from before you could even see what it could become. The questions that never got answered, the closure that just never came, or the door that was closed before you were ever ready and you never understood why. That is unfinished business. And there's weight to that, because part of you is still there, still holding the thread of something that was never really completed. You're still waiting for this resolution that may never come. That is grief too. So why does this matter? Why are we talking about all this? Because unnamed grief doesn't just sit still. It shows up in your life. It shows up in your body. It shows up in your relationships. It shows up in the decisions you make, or even the ones you don't make. It shows up as heaviness you just can't explain, as a feeling of being stuck when nothing is technically wrong, or a disconnection from your own life or even yourself. Sometimes being what we call being stuck is actually grief waiting to be acknowledged. And here's what I see again and again in my work. People come to coaching thinking they need a better plan, or more discipline, or more clarity, or a stronger mindset. And sometimes those things absolutely matter. But very often, most often, what's underneath all of it is just grief that was never really given a name. And when that grief finally gets acknowledged, something shifts. Not because something or the pain disappeared, but because you finally understand what you've been carrying all this time. You stop fighting yourself. You start working with yourself. And you begin to allow your grief to matter. You give yourself permission to feel it. So I want to invite you to sit with just a few questions. You don't have to answer them all right now, but just let them stay with you. Or if you even want to journal them, start with this. Is there a version of your life you're still mourning? Even if you never called it that. Is there a dream or a path or a relationship or a season of your life that ended without you giving yourself space to really grieve it? Is there a version of you that got left behind somewhere that you still long for or that you miss? Is there something unfinished inside you that never really got closure? And just notice what comes up for you. You don't have to fix it or solve it or even fully understand it yet. Sometimes just asking the question is just the beginning. And if something stirred in you as you were sitting with these questions or even writing it, I want to offer you something else, not as homework assignment or anything, but just another invitation. Give your grief a moment of acknowledgement, maybe a small ceremony or a ritual, just something for you. Maybe that looks like writing a letter, or maybe a letter to the dream you let go of, or the version of yourself that you left behind, or to the relationship that never really got a proper goodbye. Or maybe it's just lighting a candle and just sitting quietly for a few minutes, allowing yourself to really feel what you've been carrying all this time without trying to fix it or rush it or move past it. And maybe it's just saying out loud to yourself, I've been grieving this and I didn't even realize it. There really is something powerful about acknowledging something that never got recognition. And you deserved it then and you deserve it now. This is the work that I do every day with people, not just the grief that comes after a major loss, although that too, but this deeper, layered, often unacknowledged grief that has been shaping someone's life in ways that they couldn't even see it until someone helped name it. I used to separate my work, life coaching and grief coaching, but over time, I've realized that almost every single time they come together. Grief is woven in our lives each and every time. Because underneath so many things that we want to change, there's often grief somewhere in the story. And when that grief gets named and honored and recognized, the path forward starts to look different. It starts to actually open up. So if you feel like some of what we've talked about today is living inside of you and you'd like to support it or need help navigating through it, this is what I do. I work with people one-on-one, and I would love to invite you to schedule a free call. No pressure. If it feels right for you, I'll leave the link below. And if nothing else, I hope you walk away from this video with one thing. The heaviness you've been feeling, or the stuckness, or the disconnection. It's not a character flaw. It's not a weakness. It's not something wrong with you. It may simply just be grief that you were never really given permission to feel. And grief, even the hidden kind, deserves space. It deserves acknowledgement. It deserves to be named. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to be willing to look at it. And I hope that this video gave you a little bit of an opening to do that. And if you're on this journey, I'm here with you. I'm in it. We're in it together. And maybe if you want, you can subscribe, because over the next few weeks, we're even going to go deeper into this with the things that we carry emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, and how we can begin to release that and release the weight that we're carrying so we can move forward with more clarity and more intention. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for being here.